Hello, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, New Techniques for Process Optimization. My name is David Goodstein. I'm a webinar coordinator for the Outsourcing Institute. It's our pleasure to be the co-host of today's event with Nelson Hall. We encourage you at any time during the presentation to submit your questions to today's speakers. To do so, please click on the questions box, type your question in the space provided, and click on the submit button. Today's webinar will be recorded, and you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to the recorded webinar. It will also be available on our website, outsourcing.com. So at this time, I'd now like to turn it over to our moderator, Dan Goodstein. Dan?
Hi, thanks, David, and hello, everyone. This is Dan Goodstein. I head up the Outsourcing Institute, and good to speak with you all today. Thanks for joining us. This is the first part of a four-part series that we are doing around digital BPO. And we are fortunate to have John Wilmot, the CEO of Nelson Hall, a leading analyst firm in the space, join us. John and Nelson Hall are co-chairing this series with us this year, as well as keynoting our Outsourcing Automation Innovation Seminar Series as well. So happy to have John here with us today. Real quickly, background on the Outsourcing Institute. Outsourcing Institute is a professional association of over 70,000 outsourcing executives worldwide. And our goal is really to be a resource for all those in the space, right? So you know, those who buy and manage outsourcing, those folks come to us for kind of how to outsource, where to outsource, and so on. And so we create various different forums, both online and in person, to help those organizations and do a lot of recommending and connecting for them. And for those who sell and market in this space, we help kind of get the word out and have a variety of different speaking and publishing opportunities to showcase thought leadership and some of the things these organizations are doing throughout the industry. So, you know, one of the topics that is part of every conversation I'm having these days when I speak to both clients, providers, advisors, analysts, the whole ecosystem, if you will, is really around innovation, transformation, digital. But you know, one of the things that seems to often come up is the difference between the hype of what this stuff can do and the reality of where many of these businesses are. And speaking to John before today's webcast, we were talking about the majority of businesses are still spending the bulk of their time and budgets on running the business versus actually changing the business. And so John's feeling on that is really that there needs to be some work done around optimizing existing processes for mature organizations before you can digitize or automate these things. So I asked John to kind of walk us through some of that today. And again, this is a kind of a four-part series, so we'll kick off with this one and then tell you about the part 2, part 3, part 4 that we have planned, and also some face-to-face events kind of coming to a city near you, if you will. So we'll get to all of that. But without further ado, let me kick it off here by introducing John Wilmot. And John, maybe you can kind of take us through this this interesting time we're in right now.
Thank you very much, Dan. Let me quickly introduce Nelson Hall. I don't know if everyone on the call knows us already. We're an analyst firm focused very much on BPO. We also cover IT services, but we've really tried to cover all the front office, back office, industry specific type areas on BPO. We do all the analysis onshore. So, we wanted sort of real people close to the clients and doing interviews with the vendors, so no vendor form filling. Still a lot of the analyst houses are doing, fill in a form and we'll publish it. We don't do that. We talk to the guys, we try and audit what the capabilities are and then publish our views on that. We put together something to actually make it easy. So we're trying to do fairly detailed information on all these markets. That can be quite hard to consume. So we put together something we called speed to source, which was you have your quadrants, you can tailor the quadrants, you can say, okay, I'm interested in this bunch, you go and view summaries of the vendors in there. You can then say, okay, that was a summary, let's find out a little bit more about where they're doing the delivery from. So you can look that up online, and then when you really at your short list of say 3 people, okay, I'll go off and read the full 15 pages on them. So we've tried to make it an easy screening journey for the buy side so you could get through. And just to prove that we've got Quadrant, same as everyone else, let's put one up on the screen. The difference on these compared to others is you can actually, as a buyer, you can change the weightings on this. So we've scored all the vendors, we've set them up with weightings against 20 or 30 criteria. You can actually say, well, this one is close, but I want to change these weightings to work for my organization. So you can actually do that for it. Anyway, enough about Nelson Hall. Let's move on to this topic. And I've split it into a bunch of sections, and as usual, put in far too many slides. So, you know, Dan will tell me off at some point for that. But I'm basically an analyst, so you've always got too many slides. So really wanted to start with client satisfaction with business process services, where it's at the moment. And then look at some of the things that are actually helping us do, if you like, the new form of process improvement. So the areas I wanted to go through was clearly RPA is massive, BPASS is pretty big, though probably a bit behind RPA and operates in a slightly different way. Reporting and analytics becoming much more real-time, sort of important to have it in the mix there. Putting all these things in and trying to be a bit more agile actually then changes some of the commercial mechanisms and the governance. So let's talk briefly about that and then pull it all together at the end. So if I start with where's BPO been successful and where did it need to go? Where was the room for improvement? And this is quite simply, it's fairly simplistic analysis. The items under the what worked are areas where more than 50% of the buyers said they were highly or very highly satisfied. Room for improvement is then some of the areas where less than 50% of the buyers said they were highly or very highly satisfied, and markedly so in some cases. So, you know, before we stop being too hard on BPO, it did actually have a number of traditional virtues. It did help people standardize and consolidate their processes, and continues to do so. And by doing that, it did help them improve. It did deliver on improved process execution. It was quite good, if sometimes slightly slow, at applying Lean and Six Sigma and doing process improvement initiatives. Maybe it took a while for those to phase in, but basically people could apply Lean. And by and large, it delivered the process cost changes that were promised. And the key word there is promised. And by and large, you know, despite all the talk at the moment, you know, people tended to be happy with the caliber of the delivery teams. Not in every case, I agree, but generally the people doing the work were pretty high caliber and were pretty good. Okay, so where was it falling down? Where were customers saying, well, I want more? Well, if we start with the process cost side, yes, I've got the process cost changes that were promised, but actually I thought there was a lot more on the table. I really had a vision that went beyond that. You know, why is it stalled a bit? Why doesn't it keep on going? So there was always a feeling that the process cost reduction should be bigger. There was always a feeling that, okay, my processes do now run, you know, are much more standardized, they're much more consolidated, they run more smoothly, my SLAs look okay, but actually that hasn't had quite as much impact on the business outcomes as I would like. So probably not tied into the business outcomes, or to be honest, not even a part of the process that was having a material impact on those end-to-end business outcomes. So people were looking for more processes for that. So where were the areas of frustration then in terms of actually achieving some of that? Well, people wanted to see increased automation applied to the business processes. And that didn't happen as much as people would have liked. There are reasons for it on both sides, and we can talk about those in a bit. Yes, I'd like to see more real-time analytics in there. The issue with the traditional BPO model was the analytics was somewhat one-off and backward-looking. So there wasn't anything sort of real-time going on in many of these contracts. And then, driving that process vision and roadmap wasn't always happening to the extent that people would like. But okay, so, Model 1 or whatever version of BPS or BPO you want to call it, worked on its own terms, but now we do need to move on to a next generation that does more automation, improves business outcomes, hits the next level down of cost, tells us what's going on and so on, and all the rest of it. So if we look at where people are saying, again, this is still customers, this is a survey of, I'm trying to remember the number, 940 or 960 organizations globally. So what were the areas of high intent for this year? Well, okay, reducing cost of doing business. We're still in moderately uncertain economic times. That desire to reduce the cost of business, hasn't really gone away in the last 7 or 8 years. That's still high up on the agenda. What's relatively interesting to me about that slide is not so much that, I want to free up expenditure and I want to reduce the cost of doing business. We sort of knew that. But looking at the difference there between the digitalizing customer-facing operations, which is where we've tended to think of digital. It's very much applying social media, applying web chat, applying self-serve, new channels in at the front end. Actually, what's coming through as the major theme these days is actually I want to digitalize, I want to automate, through from the customer facing through into the back office operations and all the fulfillment, get it much more end to end and take a lot more of the people touch out of that end to end activity. So that's certainly a really big theme at the moment. Okay, so let's look at how that's changing and what's going on. So the first area really to look at is RPA. And I've titled that Filling the Gap Between Macros and Platforms, because if we stay with what worked in earlier versions of BPO, then actually, we've done the Lean Six Sigma. We tended to know where the process joins and the sources of errors were, and frequently there was a fair bit of creativity in putting macros or bits of Excel or something in to plug those gaps. The difficulty often was, and we've had clients coming to us relatively recently, still with the same issue, is I know what needs to be done, but putting in a traditional platform with a medium-sized P or a big P to cure that problem, which I know would cure that problem, is actually quite a big investment hump to go over. So, within the context of this contract, with vendor looking to make a certain amount of profitability, client saying, I've paid for this service, no one actually wanted to put the money in quite frequently to fund the platform with a medium-sized P or a big-sized P. So you got in that frustrating situation that both parties knew that more could be done, but there wasn't actually a mechanism for doing it, which is actually where RPA comes in. So let me say, first of all, what I mean by RPA, because it gets a bit, Not sure I like those pictures of robots, to be honest. I think that muddies the water a little bit. I tend to think of RPA probably a bit more as a workflow or whatever. It's it's really execution of rule-based tasks. So traditional, first gen RPA, if you like, is rule-based tasks. No cognition, no human judgment. All we're doing is operating using existing user interfaces, predefined rules and inputs. So, we know that we need to pick up data from a bunch of screens. We know we need to, move this field over here or whatever. It's important really to start with relatively high volume, simple stuff and learn. I mean, RPA, like everything else, you need to. Any new thing you're putting up, any new technique or any new technology, it always makes sense to do the easy things first and then the difficult things later. And I think, Dan, we heard an example last week of someone trying it the other way around. It never it never works when you do that. So keep it simple, stupid, works at the start. What's muddying the water a bit at the moment is some of the AI starting to come into it. So I tend to put AI probably much more in the analytics type camp, and you can use it in conjunction with RPA, which is really doing those ARM type activities. So AI is then putting machine learning into there, putting natural language processing or whatever, things that need human expertise, some sort of probabilistic calculate judgment, if you like, rather than a totally definitive one which you've got with RPA. So that's the distinction I'm making at the moment when I'm talking about RPA for the next few minutes. I know there are RPA software vendors who are, if you like, starting to merge the two to a certain extent, and maybe the next generation of RPA in a few years' time will automatically have AI sat in with it. At the moment, the implementations I've seen where they've got both, then a separate platform tends to be being used for AI rather than RPA.
John, I'm curious, it's interesting that you kind of give those definitions, because it seems like the definitions tend to change a bit depending on who you're speaking to. But I'm curious, if you look at RPA versus AI, what percentage of the customer conversations that you have, or the deals that you're seeing, what percentage of them have some form of RPA at this point, and what percentage of them have some form of AI at this point? Any sense?
I can't give you a hard stat, but I think it would probably be fair to say that the majority now have some element of RPA. Now, you need to be a bit careful there, because I think the BPS vendors, have understood RPA for a few years now and are applying it with vigor. It's not always visible to the customer, but RPA is well established in BPS vendor community. It's still not very established in end user operations. It's probably still early days in that, and it's still, I was going to say, virtually invisible in the CIOs. If you move to AI, it's clearly much lower levels, but it's almost the other way around. Seeing very little of it. There's some. There's a bit in the sort of what the BPO vendors are doing, but actually it's a much lower proportion of activity than it is in RPA. So if I said, RPA was there or thereabouts, let's say 3/4 of the time or more, AI is there, certainly way under 10% of the time. So it's those sorts of figures right now.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so let me move on a bit. So, my view of RPA is it's actually that tool that makes continuous improvement realizable. So, I knew I needed to do this before. I needed an inexpensive tool that would get me there. And RPA is that. Not changing anything. It's better than does a lot better functionality than my macros, slightly more cost than my macros, but it's nothing like the cost I'd have to lay out on a platform to cure the same headache. And the other thing is, of course, it's a lot quicker. So here we're talking a few weeks to actually do it, versus a year's major implementation and lots of testing and all the rest of it. So a lot of it is still around that data extraction, enrichment, validation, all those sorts of areas. Multi-screen integration, not for users usually so much as for contact center agents and coming into those areas. But it's relatively simple things that, it's the standard process joins and errors because there's info that was missing and we didn't extract from a particular system or whatever. Oh, okay, sorry. I've still got to build on those, let's ignore that. Okay, so in terms of the benefits to move a bit faster, the other thing with RPA, it's not tackling big processors or even big sub-processors at one hit. It's lots and lots of small hits at a sub-process level. Now, it can take 35%, 50% out, maybe more on terms of those applicable sub-processors, but then there's something that you still can't apply it to. So the cost takeout in RPA is actually a function of what proportion of the processors are addressable. So if I've got 50 sub-processors, how many of those 50 can apply it to times the cost takeout I can get. Talking to people around heavily data-intensive work in areas such as F&A and some of the industry-specific processors, the figure we seem to be veering towards, across a process with a big P, is probably around up to 20% for those sorts of processes. So I've put some examples in there. So, P2P, it's pretty good at obvious things like three-way matching. You can use it for reconciliations, supplier management and catalog management, cash application in O2C, again, reconciliation. And, as you'd expect, you can do it more in P2P than you can in O2C, and you can do more in O2C than you can in R2R. So it's really a nature of what these processes look like. And we could see, in terms of some of those processes, I put some figures on for the level of savings that you can get. But I think, then if you multiply that up across F&A, you can probably get, the end point is probably 20% across the board. What do you need to do it? I think the clue was in saying, you'd done all the lean previously and you knew you'd had these problems in terms of joins in the process or errors in the process. So you actually sort of need guys who, you need really to have had strong standard operating procedures, ideally standardized processes because that's going to make it easier, and guys with process improvement expertise, preferably Lean and Six Sigma and all those sorts of guys. And certainly one of the vendors, I think last year, one of the first things they'd done on one of these was go out and hire another 50 to 100 Lean Six Sigma guys, really to help with this. So, you've got to be thinking process rather than same process disciplines in any other form in BPM. Agent change management, clearly critical. If you are going to move a bunch of people out of particular jobs, then there's a change management. It's just the same as it ever was on offshoring or anything. The sticklers in it, the interesting question is when do you involve in-house IT? You probably need your business sponsor on board first, but then you need to involve in-house IT fairly quickly in a non-threatening manner. It's always a bit of a tightrope between thinking them that they've got too much control or a veto, or believing them feeling they're left out. They can block some of this sort of stuff, even though it's typically not intrusive. Now, there is RPA stuff that you can use through APIs, but usually you're doing it just making the keystrokes that the user would do. As I said earlier, I think the key thing is, is don't run before you can walk. I'm going to move a bit faster, Dan, because I'm going a bit slowly to get through this, as I tend to. So we'll skip some of this. The vendors are clearly developing their own libraries. So, you can develop an RPA library, and a lot of it is, I need a bot to do formatting. I need one to do data extraction. There are lots of little horizontal processors or horizontal sub-processors that I can put bots together for. And then some of the vendors are then packaging them. So, okay, so now let's pull the bunch I need together, and I've now got an account setup bot, and I've now got my cash apps bot and things like that. So that's the form they're frequently being, if you like, initially generated and then packaged by the BPS vendors, including RPA within their services.
John, are you seeing any HR services, processes, or sub-processes being affected by RPA?
Yes, we are. Don't ask me which, because I haven't got it off the top of my head. Yeah, I mean, to the extent that HR has, let's say, had some interesting systems, or an interesting range of systems in many cases previously, then, pulling the data across and between them, getting data from one to another, or getting data in and so on, is pretty important in the HR area as well.
Are there particular parts of HR, though, that are kind of good candidates for RPA, or not one in particular?
It's not one that the bulk of the traditional vendors started with. But, I mean, where we're talking, many of the traditional IT services, BPS guys, the heavy data guys, they tend not to be as strong on the HR side as they are on something like F&A and supply chain and the rest of it. So their emphasis tends to have been initially the industry-specific silos and areas like F&A rather than HR. The HR pure plays are incorporating RPA within it.
Okay.
So challenging is fun. So sorry, pricing is always fun on RPA, because okay, we're building up a bit of knowledge, but actually, certainly talk to a few people, you've got absolutely no idea, whether you're going to get 20% out or 50% out or nothing out when you apply our RPA to these. So how do you actually want to do the pricing with the supplier? One way is to say, well, actually, let me stay with fixed price or transactional pricing, and I'll just set the ongoing productivity target for the supplier. I won't worry too much about how they're using RPA. I'll just set a more aggressive productivity goal, and they can do it. And that's one way of doing it. If you stay FTE based, then the fun of potentially doing each RPA project as a separate gain share. It's pretty hard to actually pitch where that gain share could be. So, one party or the other may feel that they've left a bit more on the table than might have gone the other way. And Dan, again, last week we were talking to someone who said, well, we're going to keep RPA totally in-house, we're going to control it all, we're going to pay for all the licenses. So in terms of the license fees, sort of ballpark that I get is third the price of an FTE, about $4,000 or whatever per bot. So clearly, at that sort of price, it's a tool that does, gives you a price point that does make process improvement realizable. Okay, so conclusions, and we better get on and cover something else sharpish. So, RPA isn't changing anything. It's working on your existing processes and your existing platforms, and it's just making data flow more smoothly around it. So it's a sort of one-off hit in the way that labour arbitrage is a one-off hit, and you can probably get 20% out of rule-based processes, let's say over a 3-year period. It's a much quicker and lower transition than the new platform. You're going to have to think about the commercials, whether you reset productivity targets or gain share targets. Okay, so let's move off RPA and move on to BPAS. Now, BPAS is another of these areas that is giving process improvement. I think BPAS is actually starting to replace PETs. If you remember the old terminology in terms of platform enablers and tools and so on, BPAS isn't, if you like, doing the same thing as RPA. RPA was tackling the joins in processes and smoothing what's there in the core of your old BPO activities. BPAS is actually working on the edge, typically to do something new. So I've put it down as utility services extending process boundaries. So let's go back a step, and I'll use F&A as an easy example because it's a nice one for an easy example in all of this. So if we go back a few years, and even to be honest, in most contracts at the moment, you supplemented your ERP, you had the wraparounds, so you'd use OB10, you'd use Cooper, you'd use Concur for expenses, you'd use Web Collect or SunGuard for O2C, Trintech, Blackline, whatever on the R2R, maybe specialist stuff on areas like profit recovery. So you'd always got those as relatively client-specific platform implementations to cover areas that weren't done terribly well by your ERP. So, I need to do collections or control collections a lot better. Okay, I need SunGuard or Web Collecting, rather than relying on the ERP. So that's really where BPO was at in, let's say, generation 1 in a bit, or whatever we want to call it. What BPAS is doing is really packaging up, frequently sometimes around those same areas, but it's really trying to build a utility model rather than a client one-off implementation in support of those sorts of processes. So if we stay with accounts receivable, then TCS has TAP. Sorry, accounts payable. Then TCS has TAP for doing that. For areas like R2R, then EXL's got Blackline, and we'll put a BPAS thing around that. Huge amount going on in the industry Pacific. All the vendors are doing it massively in BFSI. So a couple of examples there, Genpact, wealth management. Let's put the BPAS around open wealth. In terms of P&C underwriting triage, again, we can put a BPAS around that. So it tends to be operating at a, let's call it a sub-process level. It could be slightly below the sub-process level, but the whole point usually is it's hitting a specific pain point. It's somewhere where the existing processes didn't work, and basically you needed an extension to the functionality you had, because I need to go a level better to actually make my record to report more efficient, or my collections actually collect more cash out of it. So it's really putting improved platforms and improved process and improved effectiveness efficiency around something that wasn't really there. So whilst RPA is sort of, I don't know, sellotape or whatever on the joins and on the process, and or Band-Aid or whatever on the processes and fixing them, this is really a sort of a bolt-on on the side to do something a bit better than was done before. Sorry, still got the builds in there. Okay, so BPAS again is going to come with a bigger investment price tag than RPA. RPA, you do it simply. BPAS, okay, it's now better than doing client specific. There's something relatively utilitized off the shelf. Okay, but it's going to be higher price point to do that than to do the RPA. The other thing that's changed, I think, really is the reporting and analytics. That reporting didn't always used to be real time, and the analytics tended to be a one-time exercise operating on historic data to tell you, what customers thought a while ago, or where processes needed to be fixed, or whatever. I think now virtually the norm within BPO is that the reporting will be real time, and it will be drilled down. So you can have the KPIs at the top level, and you can drill down to see what's actually happening beneath that level. Also starting to see analytics become much more predictive. It's not really there at the moment. I mean, things like speech and text analytics are. People are starting to move towards some of the next best action type engines in the contact center. Not there now, but early bits of technology in there. So it's really, the analytics in terms of the customer insight is starting to come in a lot more, but also people are looking to build machine learning into the processes to actually make it, to give you the analytics on how the process should change to be more effective than it is in the past. Not really there. I think the reporting's pretty real time. Again, anything that's really got AI on it isn't really there right now. Okay, so commercials and governance, and I think the whole theme on a lot of this, and a lot of the complaints of the early versions of BPO was it was pretty slow moving. You knew where you were going and what the journey was to a certain extent, but you didn't get there that fast. So what we need now is we need to change the governance and to amend the commercials so that we can actually follow the journey faster, change direction faster, if need be, fix things faster. So in terms of commercials, there is, what are the users looking for? Buyers tend to be looking for commitment to ongoing cost reduction. I think in terms of the productivity figures we've seen, I think they could probably ask for a little bit more on RPA, or maybe the RPA is a separate initiative on top. They want to get there faster. They want to flex costs down as well as up. And they want some of this linked to the business outcomes. So we're starting to see greater contractual commitment to productivity improvements, greater use of gain sharing. Again, it's a relatively small percentage of the overall value of these contracts, or the value of the price paid cumulatively. It is part of it rather than a lot of it. I think that robotics is actually moving things, let's say, much more fixed price, consumption based, moving people off FTE. We're also seeing the suppliers are more prepared to get into gain if you've got a BPAS, then you've done a lot of the investment. You're charging as a stream. On RPA, people are prepared to do a lot more gain share around it.
Yeah, John, I was going to ask you, you're talking about gain share. A lot of people seem to be talking about outcome-based deals or performance-based deals, but it seems to me that there's not a whole lot of them actually doing it. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yes, that's true. I mean, the difficulty with outcome type deals is the term tends to be used to mean two different things. So it does tend to be used per output or per transaction or per employee, as well as for gain share. So if people say outcome, you generally need to check what they mean by it. But those two do get muddled. We are seeing more gain share, and this survey of our 940 or 960, they thought gain share would be going up, but we're still, and it's rare for things to be totally gain share. It's still, the old rules still apply. If it's new money on the table, I might be prepared to do gain share if I think it's a reasonable amount. So daft areas like, collections or, you're doing upsell or some form of revenue generation for me. Yeah, I'll share the revenues with you. I've always paid sales commission, I'll do that. Collections, yeah, I'd historically get this level. Yeah, I'll pay you an incentive to do a bit better. Where it tends to be trickier still is in the cost takeout. People are doing more gain share there than they used to be, but it tends to be as part of the overall contract, not the contract itself, and it tends to be a relatively small percentage. So, we're still looking at sub 10% in terms of gain share. Again, can't remember the exact figure off the top of my head.
Is there a particular industry that is a good candidate for that, or is it more just depending on the process?
It's more depending on the process. I mean, sometimes I sometimes wonder if capital markets like a good bet and do a bit more of it than others, but I may just be being unfair to capital markets in that respect. It's usually process. So, it is a process where, it's new money. Collections has been like it for decades. As more of this stuff, and more of the contact center stuff, the customer service stuff, is getting a revenue generating element, then once it gets that revenue generating element, then an element of gain share can start to creep into it. So it's more, are you doing anything that gets me money that I wouldn't get before? The cost reduction, certainly in terms of RPA, I mean, we've seen some start off on gain share and then go back to other mechanisms, because it's just how do you get the balance right on what that gain share percentage is.
Got it. Yeah.
Anyway, let me move on. I'm meant to be moving a bit faster. Okay, so let's jump on to conclusions. This slide pretty hard to follow, but I mean, essentially what we're saying is the old BPO was pretty slow. You did labour arbitrage, then you did process improvement, then you signed a new contract, then you put in tools and platforms, and got your reporting working, things like that. These days, it's much more about knowing what those models are, so doing an element of standardization at the front, but also people are probably, I mean, okay, RPA is still going into the existing contracts. Some of the new contracts now, or some of the new areas, you can build RPA in at the front, and you can potentially build some of your BPAS in the front. So it's got a few new components in terms of robotics and BPAS, and better analytics and better reporting, and probably better knowledge of what the processes used to be. And it's essentially just compressing it into something that is more related to months than to 3-5 year period that it was before. So what I haven't said, and I wanted to do quickly, was say, well, actually, okay, so what's the client attitude to all these new models and changing those processes? So again, back to our survey of 960. And maybe the surprising thing, and the RPA embedded was below, a few points below the 28%, which is why it didn't turn in, is RPA is still only just getting really understood by the end users of it. It's not, you know, you think as something that made continuous improvement possible, it would be right up there, or 70% or 80% or not. The level of acknowledgement of it is still relatively low. What the buyers have cottoned onto is BPAS, but in standalone form. So I can take this sub-process utility and just plug it into my organization, and it's a better process and better bit of technology, and I can fix this bit. So people are really looking at the sort of standardized BPAS standalone, hit a particular pain point. And you know, while BPAS is pretty strong in terms of the wider BPO service, it's still, you know, let's focus it really on a pain point and fix it. You know, people thinking of it more in standalone form in that sense. People are interested in the embedded process analytics. I think that's pretty high actually, 27% for that thinking. So that's relatively high. Still relatively low in terms of vertically integrated BPO, by which we meant, okay, do you want to do the BPS services, you know, plus the application management, plus the infrastructure management, and you know, vertically integrate it up the stack. I mean, maybe 16% is a high proportion. I suspect most of the suppliers would be happy if that proportion did it, but it's, you know, a relatively low mind share compared to other things. So to sum up, and I think that's my last one, just checking. So in terms of what's robotics doing for you, and I'm trying to put processes impact. As far as I'm concerned, it's working continuous improvement on existing core BPS processes. So we've actually got all this load of stuff outsourced. We just need more band-aids and more band-aids and more band-aids. And, you know, and that will give us, let's say, 35% cost reduction per band-aid. If I'm lucky, up to 20% across the whole thing. I've put the band-aids on. That's perhaps being slightly unfair because we are now starting to see some sub-processors built from the ground up using RPA, you know, as the start point. So we build some new things doing it, but the bulk of it is still in band-aid form. BPAS is not in that core stuff. It's in the edge stuff that it always was. So you know, you're surrounding it's a bolt-on. One part of the value chain, an edge process relative to what you've got. It's always been done in platforms with usual suspects that I showed earlier in terms of F&A as a point solution to do a specific sub-process, you know, in a client-specific way. What it's becoming now is much more plug-and-play business services, and sometimes it isn't now incorporating the other good things. So, you know, on a good day, it might have a bit of robotics mixed in there as well, a bit of analytics mixed in there, etc. So becoming a more rounded offerings. Analytics and AI, really, well, the analytics side really starting to come more into everything. Really, so that you can see how the processes are performing, you can see how the customers performing, you can see how the supply chain's performing, coming out there. And I guess I've been careful earlier not to use the digital word. I guess all this stuff is digital, but if we look at it in terms of channels, it's again, it's trying to get all the voice and paper out of there and actually get it onto, maybe it's on mobile data entry or something like that, suppliers or employees, but that clearly applies across everything. Everyone is trying to strip out. You know, an awful lot been done in terms of stripping out paper and voice. You know, and in customer service, you know, to go to a totally different example. You know, the whole emphasis now is on self-serve. You know, rather than talking to some So that's really.
No, thank you, John. This has been helpful. So I want to open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions for John, please go ahead and enter them now. John, while some of those questions are coming in, I want to ask you kind of a general question. That there's a lot of folks out there kind of evangelizing around digital and automation and some will say that there's a huge hype factor going on right now. But my conversations with you, it seems to me that you're more of the realist, or maybe don't buy into too much of the overnight digitization phenomenon. Is that a fair assessment? And if so, I'm curious as to why. Did we lose you, John? John, are you there? All right, seems like we may have lost John. Maybe he had a good time. He finished the slides there, but I know we have some questions coming in, so we'll see if we can get John back here. In the meantime, I want to let everybody know about the rest of the series that we've got coming up here. So this is the first part of a four-part series we're doing on digital BPO. The next installment will be on June 14th. We'll be talking about analytics and artificial intelligence. And then the series continues. September 13th, we'll talk about bringing agility to governance and pricing. And then in December, the impact of disruptive and enabling technologies on operations. So we'll have not only the analyst perspective, but also the clients and providers will weigh in. So if you're interested in participating in that, we'll send you a link as a follow-up to this webinar. And if you're interested in potentially even speaking, or if you're a provider, you want to tell your story and sponsor, definitely drop me an email. So I'm thinking we still don't have John. So sorry about that, folks. But so we'll wrap it there. If you do have any questions, I know there's a few questions that did come in here. Apologies. We'll get those questions to John, and I'll commit to getting those questions answered for you. Beyond that, hopefully we'll see you on the next installment of the series on June 14th. In addition to that, we have an outsourcing, innovation, and automation seminar that we're doing in London next week. Nelson Hall will be there. That's on April 27th, and then we do it in Chicago on June 8th. If you're focused on the financial services industry, we have our Wall Street Tech Conference on May 24th in New York City, and then we'll continue this discussion in a big way in October. On October 6th, we have our Digital BPO Innovations Conference, which is really talking about optimizing process and operations in a digital world. So really kind of encompassing all of the topics that we're talking about here. So hopefully you can join us for that. All the information's at oievents.com or outsourcing.com. And if there's anything we can do for you, just drop us an email. Thanks for joining. And like I said, we'll get those questions answered for you. Have a great day, everybody.